Hi guys, today I'm going to be discussing Chapter 4, Operant Behavior, from B.F. Skinner's About Behaviorism. I want to start by saying that operant behavior is behavior that is voluntary, which is different from a reflex or respondent behaviors, which are involuntary behaviors. Skinner opens the chapter by discussing the difference between positive and negative reinforcers. A positive reinforcer is something that is added following a behavior to increase the likelihood that the behavior will reoccur in the future. A negative reinforcer is something that is taken away following a behavior to increase the likelihood that the behavior occurs in the future. Skinner says that a positive reinforcer strengthens behaviors that produce it and gives the example of pouring a glass of water. If you're thirsty and pour and drink a glass of water, then your thirst is going to go away and you're going to be more likely to pour and drink a glass of water in the future. Negative reinforcer strengthens behaviors that reduce it. Skinner gives the example of a pinching shoe. If you're wearing a shoe that is uncomfortable and you take the shoe off to alleviate the pain, you're removing that painful stimuli and you are more likely to remove your shoe in the future. Skinner talks about how reinforcement supplements natural selection. He expands upon this notion in the section Feelings of Reinforcers. He says that operant conditioning is a product of natural selection. He has you consider what we find reinforcing and why we find it so reinforcing. And then he has you consider feelings versus survival value and the difference between the two. He starts by giving the examples of salivation and the withdrawal from hot objects. These are both reflexes. So you salivate when you're around food or something that smells good due to a chemical process that's evolved through natural selection, not because you know or anticipate that something tastes good. Additionally, you would withdraw from a hot object upon touching it, not because you feel pain, but because this is a reflex that has been developed through natural selection. Skinner also goes on to discuss why salt, sugar, and sex are found reinforcing. Salt and sugar are both critical to the human diet, and as a result, those who were more reinforced by it were more likely to seek and have success in seeking these things out, and as a result passed the strength of these reinforcers down to their progeny. In addition, sex is found reinforcing because those who were more likely to find sex reinforcing were more likely to mate and produce offspring. So as a result, these things are found reinforcing because they have been passed down through natural selection. Skinner goes on to talk about how we can consider feelings more plausible when they're directed towards another person. He discusses how you might be more likely to do something or give something to someone because you like or love them, and you think that it's something that they would appreciate or enjoy. The next section is wants, needs, wishes, and desires. In this section, Skinner talks about how deprivation can increase the strength of a reinforcer. For example, he discusses hunger. If you are hungry, then edibles are going to be more likely to reinforce a behavior than if you are satiated or full. He says that we infer the notions of mode of incentive from behaviors that we observe. Skinner believed that mentalistic terms associated with reinforcers and states in which they are reinforcing are not useful. Instead, we should study contingencies via experimental analysis. In Idea and Will, he talks about how consequences that shape and maintain behaviors are absent from the setting in which they occur. Instead, they are part of the organism's history. Because we can't see this history, we often attribute behavior to free will. Skinner likens the notion of free will to the concept of spontaneous generation. So here he's essentially saying that we develop the notion of free will to explain something that we can't see. In Purpose and Intention, Skinner starts off by talking about how behaviorism has been criticized for its inability to explain purpose or intent. Operant behavior is future-oriented in nature. A person acts in a certain way in order that something will happen in the future. Skinner makes it very clear that the goal does not equal the purpose. It simply identifies the terminus. He gives the example of death. We do not live just so that we may die. He also gives the example of gamblers to prove his point about goal and purpose. Gamblers are eventually going to lose. However, that is not why they gamble. It is not their purpose. He says that motives and purposes are simply the effects of reinforcement. The next section is called Feelings Associated with Schedules of Reinforcement. On page 64, Skinner says that behavior is erroneously attributed to feelings. Confidence is a feeling that is elicited due to a behavior almost always being reinforced. He talks about how extinction can deplete or take away someone's confidence. So if you're receiving less and less reinforcement following a behavior, you are going to be feeling less and less confident about engaging in that behavior. He talks about how discouragement and depression can occur when there is not enough reinforcement. Frustration also comes from the termination of accustomed reinforcement. Skinner gives the example of a vending machine. So if you're accustomed to receiving a soda or a candy bar every time you put your money into a vending machine, and suddenly one day you don't get the candy bar or soda that you're anticipating, you're likely going to become frustrated and kick or smack the vending machine. Skinner also talks about ratio schedules in this section. He discusses the difference between fixed ratio and variable ratio schedules. Fixed ratio schedules are predictable. There can be high ratios of response to reinforcement. There can also be stretched or thin ratios of reinforcement. Skinner talks about how variable ratio schedules can be very powerful. In variable ratio schedules, reinforcement occurs in an average rate rather than a fixed rate, so it's not predictable. He gives the example of gambling. So if you think about a slot machine, you don't know when you're going to be successful. So because there's no way of predicting that rate, but you have had some random stroke of luck in the past, you're going to keep doing it in hopes that that stroke of luck is going to strike you again. The next section is aversive stimuli and punishment. He talks about negative reinforcement and how aversive stimuli act as reinforcers when they are removed or terminated. He makes it very clear that this is not the same as punishment. He talks about how shame, guilt, and sin can be feelings associated with he talks about how shame, guilt, and sin are different feelings that can arise due to punishment and are dependent upon the type or source of punishment. Excessive punishment can result in cautious feelings. It may also result in a person giving up or feeling depressed. Severe punishment can alter self-knowledge and suppress behaviors. In the next section, he discusses structuralism, which was an early form of behaviorism which focused only on the topography of behaviors. It rejected feelings and states of mind and aimed for objectivity. It claimed that organisms behave the way they do because they are repeating past behaviors, and also gave the example of imitation. Organisms do what they see others doing. The problem with structuralism was that it ignored reinforcement contingencies. In the last section, he talks about the mind and operant behavior. He says the mind plays an active role in the determination of behavior. Experiences with reinforcers lead to judging, believing, and feeling. Behavior becomes pursuit following reinforcement. And following my discussion of the chapter, I have a few questions for contemplation and discussion. The first is, what are some examples of the strength of variable reinforcement schedules? So I talked about how Skinner discusses gambling in the chapter, and I wanted to know if you guys could think of anything else. My next question is, do you feel that Skinner oversimplifies the constructs and processes of the mind? Are notions such as free will and motivation really fiction? Finally, my last question is, how would or does Skinner address the idea of preferences in terms of reinforcement? Why are some things stronger reinforcers for some individuals than they are for others? Thanks for watching my video.